Over centuries, there have been many who fought to free the Empyrean from Bakal and burned their life away, extinguished by the breath of flames. Some were unfortunately lost without purpose, while others became the amber that fed the hope that came after them. One of such fighters, who became the amber that lit the fire to end the breath of flames once and for all, fought 700 years ago. After 300 years of Bakal's rule of Iron Fist, the Empyreans had all but completely lost their art of magic. But as Bakal had hoped, they were not willing to give up and continued to fight against the dragons with what they had left, the power of science. Two groups were the driving force of this revolution: the Eternal Flame and the Seven Meisters. The Eternal Flame was the largest group of resistance against Bakal, an organization of those who valued freedom of the Empyrean more than their own lives. Under the lead of Captain Stark, they were trained and disciplined to fight against the dragons with all they had. They swore to fight the dragons until the very end, and should they fall, they would be the eternal flame that will be handed down to burn again someday. The Seven Meisters was a group of the most brilliant scientists of the time: Meisters Tenebe, Curio, Jana, Rati, Hotelui, Vogan, and Eldir. They worked with the Eternal Flame to create weapons and tech to fight against the dragons, and indeed, the weapons manufactured by them was Empyrean's best hope against Bakal. But they were carrying on a difficult struggle, barely able to keep up the fight against the dragons. To end the tyranny once and for all, they needed a decisive weapon. That weapon, and the greatest weapon they ever designed, was the DFOG, a massive mech created to be the ultimate weapon to face and destroy Bakal. It was the culmination of everything the Empyrean had, and it would be the weapon to end the reign of terror, or so they prayed. And as the mech drew completion, so grew the hope of the Empyreans. The leader of the Seven Meisters was Meister Tenebe. He was a logical yet passionate man, fit more than anyone to be their leader and an executive of the Eternal Flame. But he also had great burdens on his shoulders. It was his duty to complete the DFOG project and bring freedom to the Empyrean, to give his own child in Janna's womb a bright future. While he would do anything to achieve that dream, his righteous and logical mind could not look away from the singular peculiarity of the project. Meister Eldir was a brilliant scientist, almost too much so. Whenever they ran into walls, she would always suggest a perfect solution. While he was grateful for her help, he could not shake off the feeling that something was not quite right. To resolve this issue quietly, Tenebe tracked her with miniature surveillance drones to reveal her true identity. But what he witnessed was not something he expected even in his wildest dreams. Meister Eldir could use magic. He could not understand. Who was Eldir, and how could she use magic? None of these questions he could answer himself, and his burdened mind only became more tangled the more he questioned. One night, as he was outside to refresh his thoughts, a voice answered the question in his mind. "It is because she is not from this world." He turned to see who answered him. It was Bakal. Realizing who it was, Tenebe expected himself to be killed where he stood, but Bakal wasn't here to end him. He explained to Tenebe who she really was, the Apostle Hilder, and revealed to Tenebe that she was doing what she was to make sure Bakal died. But this was not how it was supposed to go. To Tenebe's disbelief, Bakal made a plea to him. Bakal should die in their hands, but not like this. What takes him down should be the power of the Empyrean and Empyrean alone. Bakal knew all about the Eternal Flame and the Seven Meisters, but he had let them live so that they could one day become the blade to take him down. But not like this. Tenebe could not believe him, but his claims sounded truer than anything he had heard. Why would Bakal lie about all these things when he could just swat him away like a fly? Why would he let all of them live, knowing they were creating a weapon to kill him? So Tenebe made a deal with Bakal. He would sabotage the project from within and remove the false power, and in exchange, Bakal would let Jana and some of the Meisters live. Tenebe would willingly don the mantle of a traitor, so those who survive would still have the hope to live on and fight against the breath of flames. And Bakal agreed. The meeting with Bakal all felt like a dream to Tenebe. But it was all real, and even after having promised Bakal on what he was going to do, he still had doubts. Meanwhile, the project was pacing forward even faster with a new scientist joining them, Giselle Logan. They did not know who he was, but just like Eldir, he was providing them with valuable knowledge to complete the mech. It was also then that Tenebe met strangers that he had never seen before. They were the adventurers from the future who came to the past to prevent Circo's seeds from changing history. Michel convinced him that they could be trusted, and in turn, Tenebe decided that it was time to carry on with his duty. One by one, he convinced the rest of the Meisters on who Eldir and Giselle were and what the Gayborg was turning into. While it was difficult to trust his words, they decided to follow him this one time for all he had done for them and the Empyrean. But Stark could not be persuaded. He had sacrificed so much for his oath to pull the trigger towards the dragons until the very end, even if it meant borrowing someone else's powers and using what wasn't theirs. He didn't care, so long as he could take down the dragons. He stood against them, and while he could not win against the adventurers, he bought Giselle enough time to finish the mech and take control of it. Tenebe turned to his last resort and used a special ammunition designed to deactivate Gayborg, putting it out of commission. Yet Stark still stood against them. He allowed Giselle to turn him into a mechanical monstrosity so that he could have the power to fight the dragons. Even as he was taken down by the adventurers and was on his last breath, it seemed as though he was going to pull the trigger on Tenebe for being a traitor. But in his last moment, he turned and attacked the dragons instead of Tenebe to fulfill his oath once again. We will slay the dragons with undying flames even when we draw our last breath. And with the help of those from the future, they finally took down Giselle, but it was too late. The Gayborg was in irreparable shape, and a horde of dragons were coming their way to finish it off. Eldir, now revealed to the rest of the Meisters as Hildur, was nowhere to be found. It was time to make the last decision. Volgan took control of the shambling mech, whilst Rati was doing all she could to keep it moving. But it couldn't last long against the horde of dragons, and the two Meisters were lost. Gayborg had fallen, just as Bakal had asked Tenebe. Curio and Hotta Louis carried the pregnant Jana to a safe place, so that she could give birth to Tenebe's child. But even as she looked for him, Tenebe could not be by her side. Tenebe found himself surrounded by the dragons, nowhere left to go. Now that his duty was done and he had become a traitor, there was nothing left for him to do. He drew his gun and aimed it to his own head. As a traitor, the only death he deserved was a death of shame. But it was then that the roars of the dragons rang in his ears, and he remembered the words he uttered all those years ago by Stark's side. Remembering his oath, he turned his gun not to himself, but to the dragons. We swore that day, the eternal flame will pull the trigger towards the dragons until the very end. We will slay the dragons with undying flames even when we draw our last breath, and at last our duty be fulfilled when we fall to the dragons. Our flames shall extinguish the breath of flames. The Seven Meisters and the Eternal Flame died in a tragic end. But this was not the end for the Empyrean. There were still many left who were yet willing to fight. Whether it be the hope they had in the Meisters, the rage against the traitor Tenebe, or desperation to survive against the dragons, the amber of hope still burned. Meisters Curio and Hotolui salvaged what was left of DFOG and repaired it, this time purely by what was of Empyrean. It was then sealed away in a dimensional space so that it could not be misused, and 200 years later, it would be one of the weapons to land a decisive blow against Vakal. Tenebe and Janus' child was adopted by Curio to take his name, but the secret was handed down for some time, known to the Curios as the sin and burden to be carried with them until the day Empyrean was free. And when Vakal was finally slain, Juvenal, the leader of the eternal flame Dan, disappeared into the shadows of history as the last man who knew the truth of the Tenebes and Curios. And by the amber of hope from the lost souls 700 years ago, the flame that will finally free the Empyrean was lit. With the dead as the pyre, the living will burn even greater. The new oath of the eternal flame, as uttered by Juvenal.